Ooh. Thanks, Dave. Chris Alcoholic. Um, yeah, I'd like to thank Dave for reaching out to me and asking me to do this. It's always an honor and privilege to be able to do anything in Alcoholics Anonymous. Um, I'm actually not from Frisco, Texas. I, I, I was born and raised in Southern California, and my wife and I moved out here about 25 years ago now, and it's been an amazing experience. I uh, I I I I pray to God that I do justice tonight to the men and women who have spent countless hours uh, showing me and reviewing with me and teaching me how to carry the message of Alcoholics Anonymous. Um, I, uh, I, I I got sober pretty young. I was 22 years old. I came into AA through the doors of a treatment center, like a lot of people back then. And I've been living on the streets trying to drink myself to death on Skid Row for about 10 months and got in some more trouble. And I was in a lot of pain. I hit bottom. And I had, I didn't understand why my life was in the condition it was. I didn't understand. I never heard about AA. My introduction was AA was when I was laying in my detox bed and people were talking about the AA meeting that happened every morning in the hospital. Um, and it was really painful. So I'll start with a story. Um, Growing up, I had this Doberman Pinscher. Um, he was a really big one. He was about 120 pounds. He was my best friend. I took him everywhere. Um, I had his ear show crop when he was a puppy. They were really tall and really pointy. And across the street from my house where I grew up, there was this huge open field. And we'd go out there and hike and build forts. And um, he was probably about 8 years old at the time. But I noticed one day when we were hanging around the house that he didn't look right. And I I could see his ear was red, and when I opened it up, it was filled with pus and it was all red inside, and it looked horrible. It was horribly infected. And I could see like one of those little fox tails, the things that get stuck in your socks, had gotten embedded in his ear. So I scooped him up and I took him to the veterinarian's office. And the vet's examining him and he says, "Well, we're gonna have to drain all that pus and cauterize it with this hot cauterizing gun," which I thought sounded like a really bad idea. But they had him on one of those big metal tables and they had it lifted up. And the veterinarian instructed the assistant to hold my dog's face while the doctor goes in with this red hot poker to get the infection out. And I knew that this wasn't going to go. I was kind of standing back, and this young lady's got my dog by the muzzle, and the doctor goes in, and as soon as it touches his ear, my dog lunged and almost bit this young lady in the face. I started laughing, which is really inappropriate, but I thought it was funny. And the veterinarian says to me, "Chris, do me a favor. I need for you to hold your dog's muzzle. While we do this, your dog trusts you." So I'm standing there, and now I'm holding my dog, and he is looking at me dead in the eyes as I'm holding him down, and this doctor goes in to get the pus and then to cauterize it. My dog's not moving, but he's whimpering and he's staring right at me, and I felt horrible. I wanted to tell my dog that we have to do this. If we don't put you through this pain, you are going to die from this infection. But I don't speak dog. And I'm holding him and he's whimpering. My dog's wondering why I'm not punching this guy who's poking him in the ear. And we finish up. Doctor puts some ointment in there. gives me the medication. I go to pay. Now, my dog was a really well-trained dog. He always healed on my left side. I could walk him without a leash. And as I was walking back out to my car, my dog wasn't right at my left side. He was about 3 feet behind me. I turned around and he was just looking at me, just shaking his head. And I get him in the car. He sits in the front seat. I'm driving along and I pull up along at the stoplight. And I look over at my dog and he's looking at me and I can tell he's feeling better. And I swear to God, my dog looking at me takes his left paw and he puts it right on my right shoulder. And he's just staring at me like he understood why I had to hold him down through all that pain. And I that memory is burned into my brain. And today I realize exactly what happened with me getting sober was God doing exactly that. That God saw the course of my life and held me down through a whole lot of pain, because if he didn't, I would have died. And that's where my life was going. But I didn't understand what I didn't understand at the time that it was happening. And as a direct result of working the steps, I've had a spiritual awakening. And today I understand a whole lot of things that I was never, ever able to understand before. I had a really interesting experience first getting sober. When I first got sober, part of my deal with the district attorney was that I would do 30 days in treatment, a year and a halfway house, and I would be released to my charges, and I agreed and everything. And I had to stay sober a year. I started going to meetings. They told me to find a sponsor. I'm like, well, what's that? What do I do? And they said, well, find somebody who's got what you want. And I asked this guy who's 8 years sober, who had a car and a place to live, and who was about to get married. And I thought, well, that looks good. I'll ask that guy. And we literally went through the first 3 steps in less than 5 minutes. He asked me if I was powerless over alcohol, my life was unmanageable. I'm like, well, yeah, I was living on the streets. I'm in trouble with the law. I'm living in a halfway house. Yeah, I don't, I guess. He asked me if I believed in God. And I said, yeah, I believe in God. That's the only question he asked me about that. And this guy has no idea that as a young man, I had made up my mind to be a priest, and I was actually going to go to seminary before my life blew up. And he asked me if I wanted to turn my life over to God, and I said, sure, that sounds like a good idea. Let's do that. And he handed me a bunch of mimeograph sheets. And I'm not talking Xerox copies. I'm talking mimeograph, the kind of copies that were on that paper. And it had like light blue ink, and you could sniff the paper and it smelled like ammonia. He gave me these sheets and he told me to fill them out. And we didn't open the book once. And I filled out all these sheets, and I met him before the Thursday Night Fights meeting in Seal Beach. And I read it to him. And he said, okay, you're done with steps, go to meetings. And that's what I did. This guy, 8 years sober, told me I'm done with the steps, go to meetings. And in the beginning, it was great because I didn't want to hurt the people in my life anymore. And my being sober seemed to make everybody happy, but I was getting worse and I didn't understand why. And by the time I was 6 months sober, I was miserable going to meetings. And I white knuckled it until I got my year. And when I got my year and my legal stuff was straightened out, I approached this man and I said, hey, I want to thank you for your time, but Alcoholics Anonymous is obviously not for a guy like me. I'm not experiencing what everybody's talking about. I am miserable sober, and I'm either going to blow my head off or drink. And I would rather take my chances back on the street than continue living sober, miserable. And I'm really glad that Miles didn't say, Chris, you're absolutely right. AA is not for you. You're too sick for it. He told me that he had known for a long time that I needed more than what he had to offer. And he asked me, will you please give AA another shot? There's this meeting called the Truth, Light, and the Way, and it was in South Central Los Angeles. He said, will you please go to this meeting and just listen? I don't know why I went. I lived in Newport Beach, California at the time, but I jumped in my car Wednesday night. I drove to this church, and anybody familiar with South Central Los Angeles? Guys who look like this do not hang out in Compton. We don't. I mean, the only time you really go to Compton is when you look like this, is if you own the liquor store. I had no business being there. I experienced a very different meeting. These people were bearing witness and testifying to the power of God they were able to find and maintain a relationship with, and all they talked about was the big book. And through a series of events, I found myself sitting across from this guy named Joe Hawk. And I learned more about Alcoholics Anonymous from that man than I did my whole year of going to hundreds of meetings. And he pointed out to me that Alcoholics Anonymous is not a meeting. If you look at the title page of the book, it says Alcoholics Anonymous is a story how many thousands of men have recovered from alcoholism. The Alcoholics Anonymous is a book. It describes the AA recovery program. When you look at the forward of the first edition, actually in the preface, second paragraph, it talks about the program of recovery, right? That it's not, A is not what I thought. It talks about the first portion of this volume describing the AA recovery program has been left untouched. If I want to know what AA's program recovery is, I find it in the first 164 pages. The long form of the short form of the 12 steps that were hanging on the wall that seemed so ominous to me when I got sober, the full directions to those steps is contained in the book. And I've spent my life working and reworking the steps. And I don't know, I miss Joe a lot. He was a tremendous influence in my life. And after Joe passed, that's when, God, I think Myers and I met 18 years ago. And I persuaded him to go to lunch with me a couple of times. And I finally worked up nerve to ask him to be my sponsor. And he has been such a tremendous influence in how I carry this message. And to effectively carry the message of the alcoholic who still suffers. I didn't know what I didn't know. And I thought that being alcoholic was drinking and getting in trouble. And if I could just not get in trouble and get away with drinking, I'd still be doing it. And when I started getting into the steps, it was pointed out to me that the first step is broken up into 3 parts. The first 2 parts are contained in the first half of the first step leading up to the dash, that I admit that I'm powerless over alcohol. And I'm powerless 2 ways. The first way I'm powerless is described from the doctor's opinion all the way to page 23. And it's all around this allergy idea, this theory that Dr. Silkworth came up with. And it talks about on page XXVII, it says that we believe and so suggested a few years ago that the action of alcohol in these chronic alcoholics may be the manifestation of an allergy, and that the phenomenon of craving is limited to this class and never occurs in the average temperate drinker. And nobody had ever said anything to me about there might be something wrong with me physically when it comes to alcohol. And I really didn't understand this allergy idea until people took the time to kind of explain it to me. And I'm allergic to scallops. That's absolutely 100% true. If I eat scallops, my throat closes up. I break out in hives. If I eat at the wrong time of the year, I could possibly die. But when it comes to drinking, I don't break out in hives. I don't understand that. But when I had this idea of the craving explained to me, it made a whole lot more sense that when I my being alcoholic, that when I drink, I'm no longer the same guy that was standing before you sober without alcohol. When I start to drink, my body demands more. By definition, an allergy is an abnormal reaction to a common substance. And 90% of the population, when they drink, they hit their target and they stop. My brothers are all normal, and sometimes their targets to go out and blackout drink. Sometimes it's to go out and have a couple of beers. Thing with me is that my target started moving. And when I drink, I can't tell you what's going to happen. I may stop where I want to stop, but what was happening 99% of the time at the end of my drinking is once I started, I had to be physically stopped because of this physical craving. That when I start to drink, my body just demands more. And that changed a lot of my view around why I got in trouble. I used to think that I got in trouble because I drank too much. That's not been my experience. I got in trouble because I couldn't get enough in me. I could not consume enough fast enough. And I didn't understand that until people explained to me what Dr. Silkworth was talking about. And I was able to admit that, not concede, not agree with. It's interesting because I actually, on my big book, I've got this little movie ticket. It says admit one. Admit is to let in. I need to let in these ideas and consider them. And when I admitted that I have this physical allergy to alcohol, I took a totally different view of my relationship with drinking. And I used to, I don't know, I used to think that I drank because of my emotional state. When I was depressed or unhappy, but I also drink when things are going well. I drink when things are going bad. I drink when I get a job. I drink when I get fired from a job. And it doesn't matter my emotional state. I I drink at all ends of the scale. And I started to realize that when all the people when I was growing up were pointing at alcohol saying that's your problem, they didn't realize what alcohol was doing for me. Alcohol wasn't my problem, and Alcoholics Anonymous was able to do something for me that nobody had ever been able to do. And I page 51 talks about leaving aside the drink question. They tell why drinking was so unsatisfactory. Alcoholics Anonymous was able to take me out from behind the bottle and take a look at what my life was like without it. I was using alcohol as a solution. And there's this interesting thing that we read the 9-step promises on bottom page 83, top page 84. And the reason why they're not extravagant promises is because I've already experienced every single one of them. When I drank, I knew a new freedom and a happiness. When I drank, I didn't regret the past and wish to shut the door on it. When I drank, I comprehended the word serenity, new peace. When I drank, it didn't matter how far down the scale I went. When I drank, the feeling of useless and self-pity disappeared. On and on. When I drank, my whole attitude and outlook upon life changed. When I drank, I lost fear of people, of economic insecurity. When I drank, I suddenly realized that alcohol was doing for me what I couldn't do for myself. That alcohol, what other people were saying was a problem, was actually a solution for me. And I'm really grateful for every drop I ever drank, because alcohol was able to manufacture a bottom I couldn't manufacture on my own, which put me in a position where I needed to work the steps, because that's what I needed to do, because I'm alcoholic. And understanding what my relationship with alcohol was back then really helped me to understand that. But the thing is that I'm allergic to scallops. You know what I never, ever, ever, ever eat? I never eat scallops because I know I'm allergic to them. But when it comes to alcohol, my knowing that it won't stop me because of the second half of the first half of the first half. How I'm powerless mentally. It's 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 interesting because on page 23 it switches gears. Very top paragraph. It talks about these observations around the allergy. They're academic and pointless if our friend never takes the first drink again, thereby setting the terrible cycle into motion. It's academic. It's really good for me to know about the allergy. It helped me to explain a lot of things to a lot of people about why I did what I did when I was making amends, but it's pointless because if I never, ever, ever pick up another first drink again, I will never, ever, ever, ever experience the allergy. And it goes on page 23. It says, therefore, the main problem of the alcoholic centers in his mind rather than his body. And page 23 to page 43 is all about how I'm powerless mentally. That I suffer from these obsessions, these persistent disturbing preoccupation with the unreasonable idea of picking up a drink. And I can relate to that. Page 37, top of the page, talks about insanity. I'm not talking about doing the same thing over again, expecting a different result. When I drink, I'm not thinking about doing the same thing, expecting a different result. I'm expecting the exact same result, that I drink and I get drunk. Insanity out of the book is, it says, whatever the precise definition of the word may be, we call this plain insanity. How can such a lack of proportion of the ability to think straight be called anything else? My insanity is that I don't think straight around alcohol. I've literally, one night I went to this party and my target was to go see my friend's band play, get home at a reasonable hour, get some sleep and go to work. What wound up happening was I went into a blackout. I got in a fight again. I got arrested again. And I spent a few days in lockup. And when I got out of jail, I was stone cold sober. And some people may remember those Velcro wallets, right? With a little secret pocket. I'd always tucked a $20 bill in there for when I got out of jail because I knew I needed cab fare home. And most of all, I needed to walk across the street from Orange County lockup, go to the liquor store. As soon as I got out of lockup from that arrest, the first thing I did is I went to that liquor store and I bought a 40-ounce Old English 800 and I sat it on the curb and I drank it. That's insane. If I were to eat a kiwi and I black out, rip off my clothes, get in a fight with 8 cops and get arrested, I will never, ever, ever, ever eat another kiwi. But when it comes to alcohol, I do this over and over and over again. Why? Because I'm insane. Like it talks about on page 37. I don't have the ability to think straight. I couldn't equate all of these problems and all of this stuff to me drinking and going into a blackout. And the first thing I did, stone cold sober, was pick up a drink. And that explained to me why it's interesting because when I was in treatment, I heard a lot of really weird things. The head facilitator of the adult unit one day, there was about 80 inpatients. He made all of us stand up one morning and he says, okay, everybody do this. If you think of drinking, just think it through. He made everybody do this. I'm standing in the back. I said, I am not doing that. That is ridiculous. If I could think it through, I would have thought it through way before I ever wound up here. I don't understand what any of you people are talking about. This makes absolutely no sense to me. And he had us write down our triggers list. And in all honesty and sincerity, I raised my hand and I said, hey, Willie, what do you mean by trigger? And he says, oh yeah, triggers, the things that make you drink. And I'm like, I drink because it's Tuesday. I drink because I just woke up. they were talking about this hungry, angry, lonely, tired thing. And I'm like, but I also drink when I'm full, happy, just woke up and I'm hanging out with people. What does that even mean? I don't understand the point you're trying to make with this triggers. I would have to list everything because I drink when she stays, I drink when she leaves, I drink when I get a job, I drink when I lose my job. I I I drink regardless of of the situation. And page 137, it's interesting because the big book only uses the word trigger once in the big book and to the employers, and talks about a guy who puts his toe on the trigger of a loaded shotgun and he blew his head off. That's the only time it ever talks about a trigger. I don't have triggers. What I have is insanity. I don't have the ability to think straight around alcohol. I can't just think it through. It talks about on uh, page 24 that I can't bring to mind with sufficient force the memory of suffering, humiliation of a week or a month ago. I don't have a defense against the first drink. In and of myself, I can't, man, if I could just think it through, or if I could just remember or recall the pain and the suffering, I would have stopped when I was 16 years old. But I can't because I'm powerless. And when I understood the first half of the first step, I admit that I'm powerless. I let these ideas in. It switches gears on the bottom page 44 and top page 45, where it talks about the second half of the first step. That I had this unmanageability in my life. It's interesting because when I first got sober, I thought the first step said, I admit that I'm powerless over alcohol, and that's why my life is unmanageable. But that's not what it says. It says, I admit that I'm powerless over alcohol, dash, which means end the thought, start a thought. It's a conjoined thought, but they're two separate thoughts, that my life is unmanageable. And it talks about bottom page 44, top page 45. It talks about if a mere code of morals or better philosophy of life were sufficient to overcome alcoholism, many of us would have recovered long ago. And I was raised with codes and philosophies. I know the difference between right, wrong, good, bad, truth, lies. I know what a good person looks like. I know what I look like, and I'm a bad guy. But I can't do it. It talks about I can try and will these things with all my might, but the needed power isn't there. I've tried to be good. I remember my mom one time, she was pleading with me to please not continue drinking. And she was like, Chris, just try harder. And it was difficult because I was trying my hardest at the age of 21. My trajectory was not good. And I'm like, this is me trying. You want to see me not try? And that's when I went to 5th and San Pedro and started drinking on the streets because I didn't want my mom to see me implode. It talks about on top page 45 that our human resources, as marshaled by the will, that were not sufficient, they failed utterly. And the first new paragraph on page 45 says, lack of power is our dilemma. We have to find a power by which we can live. It has to be power greater than ourselves, obviously, but where and how we define this power. The lack of power is my problem. That I don't have the power to tell the truth. I don't have the power to be the person that I want to be. I don't have the power to do the next right thing, which baffled me because I was going to meetings and people were saying, just don't drink no matter what, put the plug in the jug, do the next right thing. And I'm like, if I could do all that, I wouldn't need AA. I'd be out just not drinking no matter what, doing the next right thing. And it's like, if you can do that, why are you in AA? AA is for people who tried to just not drink no matter what, who tried to do the next right thing and failed and couldn't do that. That's what this program is for. The people don't have the power to pull that off. And the very next paragraph on page 45 says, well, that's exactly what this book is about. Its main object, it's to enable you to find a power greater in yourself, which will solve your problem. That's why I'm working the steps. It seems because step one is all about the diagnosis. Tells me what's wrong with me. Step two, coming to believe the power greater in myself that's going to restore me to sanity, is the solution. Because if I get restored to sanity and I can think straight around alcohol again, I won't pick up a drink. And that's what the rest of the chapter, We Agnostics, is all about. And it was interesting because I thought that the second step was all about fixing my broken relationship with this childhood God and figuring out what I missed. And it was the exact opposite. It wasn't about looking at me. I came to believe in a power greater than myself the exact same way I came to believe in alcohol. When I was growing up, I saw my brothers, I saw my friends, I saw my family, people drinking and having a great time. And I thought, if I drink, I too shall have a great time. So I took some action and I started drinking and I got some results and I started drinking and I got more results. And it's the exact same thing with AA. It wasn't about analyzing my stuff. It was about looking at all these people in AA who are doing this work, who got power that I don't have. And I came to believe in a power greater than myself by looking at you guys' example. The other weird thing about the second step is I thought this whole the chapter We Agnostics was about getting rid of my agnosticism, but it's actually not. The chapter is called We Agnostics, not we used to be agnostics, or we were once agnostics and then we did this work. Because I somewhere in my mind I thought you've got an atheist here, an agnostic here, and a true believer here, and what the steps are trying to do is take the atheist and the agnostic and make them true believers. But the book also talks about people with these religious convictions. They're probably in worse shape than the atheist. What this chapter is trying to do, it's called We Agnostics because it's trying to bring about my agnosticism. Being agnostic by definition is not committing to an idea of God. And what the steps are doing is taking the atheist and the true believer and bringing him to a state of agnosticism where I'm not committing to an idea of God. And it shifted my whole position to what I was looking at in the second step. And in that way, by not committing to an idea of God, I get to see what God truly is and get to see the power of God. And when I understood the solution, I had to make a decision. The third step, a decision to turn my whole life over to God. And it's covered based from page 60 to page 63. And it was kind of confusing because a lot of times when I hear people talk about step 3, they're not even talking about step 3 anymore. That the decision that I'm actually making is on the bottom of page 62. It's weird because I hear people say, I don't know how it works. And they're sober 25 years. And I'm like, I don't understand that kind of false modesty. If you don't know how it works and you can't explain it to a newcomer, you probably shouldn't be sponsoring people. There's a whole chapter written on how it works. And on page 62, it even says, this is the how and why of it. And if you're looking for a grand explanation of how and why, you're not going to get it because how, it says, first of all, we had to quit playing God. That's how I do it. Why do I do it? Because it didn't work. The how and why, 2 short sentences. And then it says, next we decided, this is the third step decision. Next we decide that hereafter in this drama of life, God's going to be the director, which means I'm the actor. I'm going to ask direction from God. Then it says, he is the principal, we are his agents. A principal is the guy in charge. He's the boss. An agent, by definition, is one who acts on behalf of the one who has power. God's not my little buddy, HP, nickname him. He's the principal. I work for God, and it's difficult in meetings of AA. I can't even go into a lot of meetings and say, my name's Chris and I'm a recovered alcoholic without people getting mad at me. Just imagine if I walked into a meeting and I said, my name's Chris and I'm an agent of God. They would lose their God. But that's exactly the decision that I'm making. That I'm going to be an agent of God. And I'm going to work on behalf of him. And then it says, he is the Father and we are his children. And The basis of a father-child relationship is trust. So when I look at this decision that I'm making, it's that I'm going to seek direction from the guy in charge that I trust. That's the decision that I'm making. And it goes on to say that most good ideas are simple, and this concept is the keystone of the new and triumphant arch which we pass to freedom. And I'm on this side of this decision, and the decision that I'm making is to go after this power. I'm going to decide to do the work. This isn't about turning my own life over to God, and now I've got the new Ronco pocket God, and when I got a problem, I take God out and I wave him around, and then he takes care of the problem. And then when that problem goes away, I put him in my free with higher power purchase case until I screw up my life again and I need him. It's not like that. He's the director. I'm going to be seeking God's direction in all the things that I do from this point forward. And I really like the third step mile markers on the top, page 63. When I sincerely take that position, all sorts of remarkable things followed. I have a new employer who's all powerful, who'll provide what I need. As long as I keep close and perform his work well, established on such a footing, I'm less and less interested in my little plan designs, more and more become interested in seeing what I can contribute to life. As I feel new power flow in, as I enjoy peace of mind, I discover that I can face life successfully. And when I become conscious of his presence, I begin to lose fear of today, tomorrow, and the hereafter. I'm reborn, which was a huge promise for a guy like me. I am constantly amazed that society allows me to walk around with normal people because I'm not supposed to. I am a felon. I belong in jail. At one point I was going to go willingly because of all the harm I was causing. But as a direct result of this, I didn't get a better version of my last life. I've been reborn. I have such an amazing life today as a result of these steps. It's a trip because I after writing inventory and following directions right out of the book, I look at the three common manifestations of self: resentment, fear, and sex. My very first resentment inventory had 488 people on it. I went through what they did to me. I looked at the causes, and then I looked for my false blames, mistakes, and I saw where I lacked power, where I screwed all these people over as a direct result of my selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened motives. And I see all these areas where I'm God deficient. I read that, and every year I go through inventory, I read to lots of people. I don't read to one person. Why? Because the book says that you read it to person or persons. And it's really weird because in California I was raised where you read to multiple people. And what I'm looking for when I read inventory to multiple people are the fifth step mile markers, where they're on page 75, and it talks about I can look the world in the eye. I can be alone at perfect peace and ease. My fears fall from me. I begin to feel the nearness of my Creator. I may have had certain spiritual beliefs, but now I begin to have a spiritual experience, and I feel I'm on the broad highway. That if I read to one person and then I make my amends cards and I go out and I make amends to people, that's only the second time that I'm looking at this stuff. I was instructed to continue reading my inventory to people until I start seeing those fifth step mile markers in the middle of page 75. And that's an indicator for me to go on. And that way, it's interesting because my first time reading, I'm kind of nervous. Second time, it's not so much. I'm starting to understand it more. This last inventory, I go through the steps every year. I actually just finished with a group of guys. Between the five of us, there's about 127 years. And my inventory had 537 people on it this year. And I read it to 6 people. And by the time I'm done reading it to multiple people, I'm so comfortable with the information then when I go out to make amends, it's not the second time I'm looking at it. And I actually enjoy making amends. I'm not worried about what I'm saying or how I'm going to say it because I know the information inside and out. And by doing that, it puts me in a really good position for what it talks about on top page 76, that if I can answer those questions on the bottom of page 75, is my work solid so far? Are the stones properly in place? Have I skimped on the cement I put in my foundation? If I can answer those questions at AA satisfaction, it says, then I can look at step 6. And it's most people I talk to, they can't tell you about the cement, the common peril and common solution it describes on page 17, right? Meetings in the book. They can't tell you about the cornerstone on page 47, where I'm answering that question, am I now willing to believe there's a power greater than myself? They don't understand the cornerstone that I just talked about on page 62, about that decision that I made. And if you can't answer those questions on the bottom of page 75, the book even says, if you can answer, then you look at step 6. So if you can't answer it, you got to go back, because I need to be ready. Step 6 in these ideas, am I now ready to let God remove these key defects of character? Ready is in fit condition for immediate use. I always thought it was about being willing, not opposed to in mind. That if I'm willing, I should be able to do it. And that's absolutely false. If I told all y'all that I'm going to take you out in a plane and I'm totally willing to be the pilot, but I've never been to flight school, I don't even know where the ignition key goes, I don't know how to adjust the mirrors, I don't even know where the gas pedal is, would you want me to fly your plane? No. It doesn't matter how willing I am. If I'm not in fit condition to do the task, then I shouldn't be doing it. And understanding a defect was a huge thing, because I thought a defect were all these things that I didn't like about me that I want God to get rid of. To find out that by definition, a defect is a lack that produces imperfection. I got to add God. And those were all the areas that I identified through inventory. Where do I need to add God? Step 7 is where if lack of power is my dilemma, step 7 on page 76 is where I'm asking God to grant me strength to do his bidding. God grant me the strength that I haven't had my whole life to do what needs to be done. I'm one of those guys who made all my amends, because the people that I hang out with make all their amends. My first run through took me 2.5 years to do 355 formal sit-down amends, and I wrote 150 some odd letters. And I was reborn. I could go anywhere on this earth where other free men may go without disaster. And I actively do a moving inventory step 10. Hell, I can show it to you. I do a nightly review of how my day went. I do a written on awakening, looking at self-pity, dishonest, self-seeking motives and asking God to remove those. And I'm really active in step 12. And as a direct result, step 12 says, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, I try to carry this message. And as a direct result of the men and women who've taken countless hours going over this work with me, I've got a message to carry, but I'm not the message, I'm just the messenger. So I know we're out of time. There's the story of this blackout alcoholic. He often drank into blackout, and he comes out of a blackout in the middle of the desert. Doesn't know where the hell he's at. So he starts wandering around, looking. Years. Occasionally he'll run into another alcoholic who went into a blackout, doesn't know where he's at. Sometimes they'd hang out, sometimes they wouldn't. And then one day he finds this alcoholic, and they're out in the middle of the desert and they're talking. Guy says, how long have you been? I've been out here 12 years. I don't know where I'm at. I don't know what's going on. And they see this mountain range, say, hey, have you been over there? So they decide to walk together, go to this mountain range. And as they get closer, they hear the sound of water. And then they hear the sound of a town. And they're super excited. And they walk, and there's a bridge going over this river to this town. And there's this guy standing there and they say, hey, what's going on? They said, oh, that's utopia. Everything you want, free, blissful living. Walk over the bridge, enjoy. One alcoholic runs across the bridge and he disappears in the crowd. And the other alcoholic turns around, starts walking back in the desert. And the guy at the bridge goes, hey, where the hell are you going? The town's this way. The alcoholic goes, yeah, but out there are thousands of alcoholics that I've met who have no idea this place is here. I got to go tell them. And that's what I spend my life doing these days. I've got an amazing life. I'm married to a wonderful woman in Alcoholics Anonymous. I got a 15-year-old boy. My wife is a blonde-haired, blue-eyed Texan. You want to see something strange? Look at my son. He looks like me, but he's got blonde hair. It's the weirdest thing. I've got a 12-year-old daughter. She turns 12 next week, or at the end of this week. She's the first girl born in my family in 75 years. I got this career. I never thought I'd say I have a career. I got a career. I'm the vice president of operational risk for the largest bank in the US in the world. And I don't have a college degree. How does a guy get out of a cage and led to this life? I only know of one way, and that's through a man taking the time to go through the program of AA with me, word by word, line by line. If there was an instruction I did, if there was a question, I answered it. And he put my hand in God's hands through working these 12 steps. And I owe my life to this program. And I'm really grateful to be here. Thank you all for letting me share.